Hey guys, welcome to week 3 of AP Psych Online. Also, welcome to a new unit. We're kicking off learning today, and this unit tends to be a little bit more difficult, so I'm actually going to do something a little bit different than I had in my other videos. I'm actually going to walk you through the examples using the PowerPoint. I'm going to talk through the PowerPoint just because a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense when you're reading it, but it kind of helps to hear it from somebody too, so hopefully this helps you out, and hopefully for some of you this kills two birds with one stone, because then you can just watch the video and not have to click through every slide in the PowerPoint, although I do recommend going back and taking a look at it. So let's get started first off by talking about what learning is. Learning is a change in behavior due to experience. It's not this, what we typically think of learning happening in school, where you're presented with a list of words and you have to know what the definitions are and you have to remember those definitions. That's all memory. Learning has to do with behavior. Learning is more the first time you reached up to the stove as a little kid and touched the hot pot on the stove, you learned, 1, that it was hot, and 2, it hurts when you touch it, and you shouldn't do that. And then you change your behavior. You don't reach up and touch things that are hot anymore. So to kick off learning, we're going to talk about classical conditioning with a name that should ring a bell because he is one of the more famous psychologists that we're going to study. Ivan Pavlov, Russian physiologist who studied digestion in dogs. He was working in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He actually won a Nobel Prize in 1904 for his work with digestion in dogs. So as he was working in his lab with the dogs, he noticed that the dogs would start to drool before the food was even in their mouths. So he kind of theorized that our digestion process actually starts before we start eating, because our mouth produces saliva before the food is even in our mouths. It's just kind of out in front of us, so we start to drool. And he wondered if he could cause the dogs to drool with other stimuli instead of just the food. So he started ringing bells and flashing lights and playing music and ticking a metronome to see if he could make those things cause the dogs to drool like the food did. And he found out that when he presented these random stimuli just before the food, the dogs still drooled. And when he took them away, the dogs still drooled. So he really stumbled onto this idea of classical conditioning, that learning is passive. It happens naturally, and we start to associate things with other stimuli, and it causes the same response. So let's get started on how classical conditioning actually works. I'm going to talk you through all of the steps. So first, we need a relationship that happens naturally. We have an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. This is your natural cause and effect. So the unconditioned stimulus is some sort of natural reflexive response. Here in this case, we have some meat that is going to make our carnivorous turtle drool. We have a medication that is going to make our patient feel ill. And we have a needle that is going to make the old lady scream when she gets a shot, right? These are all natural relationships. They happen anyway. These things cause the unconditioned response, or the natural response, the natural cause. So what our goal is going to be is to introduce something else that is going to cause these responses without the unconditioned stimuli being there. So we have to pick our neutral stimuli. Okay, these are going to be something that by itself, there's no response. By itself, it's not going to make the turtle drool. By itself, it's not going to make the man sick. And by itself, it's not going to cause the old lady to scream. So here we have some neutral stimuli. We have a bell. We have a light that is going to be flashed on and off. And we have a picture of Michael Jackson. So we introduce our bell before we show the meat to the turtle. We introduce our blinking light before we give the shot to the little old lady. And we show the picture of Michael Jackson before our patient takes his medication and gets sick. That's really the key of classical conditioning. The neutral stimulus has to be presented before the unconditioned stimulus. So it has to happen before this natural relationship. It can't happen after, because then it's the meat that's still causing the turtle to drool, or the shot that's causing the old lady to scream. Okay, so we present it a whole bunch of times. The more you do it and the longer that you do it, the stronger the response is going to be. Eventually, the body starts to link together the neutral stimulus and that unconditioned stimulus, so that initial cause. This is called acquisition. So, in the mind of the turtle, the meat and the bell get linked together. In the mind of the little old lady, this shot and this flashing light get linked together. And in the mind of our sick patient, the medication that he's going to take gets linked to this picture that he's going to be shown of Michael Jackson. Okay? We know that the learning has occurred when the neutral stimulus causes the previously unconditioned stimulus. So when we take out that unconditioned stimulus, okay, when we take out the unconditioned stimulus, we still have the unconditioned response. You know that you have done this right when the unconditioned response and the conditioned response are identical or close enough. So here, the penguin's going to ring the bell and our turtle is going to drool. The light is going to be flashed and our little old lady is going to scream. And the picture of Michael Jackson is going to make our patient nauseous. Okay, so like I said, at this point, the neutral stimulus now has changed its name to conditioned stimulus, and the unconditioned response should be the exact same as that conditioned response. That's how you know you did it right. Those last two steps are exactly the same. So sometimes when you choose a neutral stimulus, there are things that are close enough to the neutral stimulus that can cause the response. This is called generalization. So in our example with our picture of Michael Jackson, a picture of Janet Jackson, his sister, would be similar enough to make our patient sick. And this picture of Gollum from Lord of the Rings kind of looks a little like Michael Jackson, so maybe it would make the patient sick, although not quite as close as his sister Janet. On the other hand, when you have a stimulus that is so different, okay, we're able to discriminate against that stimulus. Now, I know this isn't the typical definition of discrimination that you guys are used to, but it is important. Okay, so something is so different from the conditioned stimulus that there is no conditioned response. So, in this case, this picture of Michael Jackson looks nothing like this picture of Mr. T, and he doesn't really look like Dora the Explorer, who isn't even really a person, she's a cartoon. Okay, so that's something to be aware of when picking your stimuli and when trying to pay attention to reasons why the conditioned response can actually happen. The problem with classical conditioning is the acquisition is not permanent. After a while, and depending on how strong the relationship is or how weak the relationship is, after a while, the conditioned stimulus is no longer going to be associated with the unconditioned stimulus, and it's going to end up becoming, just like the dinosaurs, extinct. Okay, extinction happens when the response no longer happens when that conditioned stimulus is present. But like I said, the unconditioned response and the unconditioned stimulus happen naturally all together, so that never really goes away. The dogs would always kind of drool over their food, but after a while, when the food wasn't present anymore, Pavlov's dogs stopped drooling at the sound of the bell or the flashing light or the metronome or whatever. But sometimes after extinction happens, randomly, the conditioned response can come back. So this is called spontaneous recovery. So imagine in Pavlov's lab, he's working with his dogs on something else, and the bell rings again, and the dog just out of nowhere starts drooling. Okay, it can happen randomly, and it can happen spontaneously. So hopefully all of this makes a little bit more sense, and hopefully this was a little bit easier to follow than trying to do it on your own. I'm going to also give you an experiment you can try at home if you want on the Edmodo page. But if you have any questions, let me know. That's pretty much classical conditioning in a nutshell. It should be pretty easy to understand. Like I said, any questions, let me know, and I'll see you tomorrow.